We've been going through Matthew. We've been going through the life of Jesus because he says, if you know me, you know the Father. If you've seen me, you've seen the Father. So, what a better way of getting to know God than to study Jesus? And so, we have been studying the life of Jesus, and we've gone through the Sermon on the Mount, and we've gone through some of the examples of him living his life of bringing a little bit of heaven on earth by healing people, helping to undo some of those self-destructive things that we've done in our lives as humans. That's what he did here on earth. That's the good news of why he came and why he's still active with us today. And we've seen this through the study, and we're now in chapter 13, where he's shifted his teaching style to parables. And we got into why he did that, and we talked about the parable of the soils, which talks about the condition of our own hearts and how we need to examine the condition of our own hearts and get our own soil receptive to hear what he has to teach us. And now we are continuing on with Matthew 13 with a new parable. And this is the parable of the weeds, or some know it as the parable of the tares, depending on your translation. That is in Matthew 13, starting in verse 24. I'm going to read 24 through 30. He presented them with another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like a person who sowed good seed in his field. But while everyone was sleeping, an enemy came and sowed darnel among the wheat and went away. When the plant sprouted and produced grain, then the darnel also appeared. So the slaves or servants of the landowner came and said to him, "Sir, didn't you sow good seed in your field? Then where did the darnel come from?" He said, "An enemy has done this." So the servants replied, "Do you want us to go and gather it?" But he said, "No, since in the gathering the darnel you may uproot the wheat along with it. Let both grow together until the harvest. And at harvest time, I will tell the reapers, first collect the darnel and tie it into bundles to be burned, but then gather the wheat into my barn." So on the surface, is there anything that stands out to you about that? Anyone on Twitch? Here again. For me, in the past, I always talk about my past. I would read this thinking, I'm definitely the wheat. I've said the magic words, I got my golden ticket to heaven, and the people who don't have their golden ticket are the weeds. And those people who, and then insert your sin or people group here that you're always raving against into this line, those people are the weeds. And I'm doing that right now with judgmental Christians, because that's what my people group is judgmental Christians. Is I'm really bad about judging the judgers, so I'm not immune to this either. Hey, Coldest, how are you doing? So, as is normal the case for me, since becoming a pastor here, I have begun studying way more in depth, and this is because that we as teachers have a very great responsibility and weight on us for what we teach others. There's this extra level of accountability to Jesus, and I take that very seriously, and I don't want to lead you the wrong way or teach you anything that's not teaching. So I take that very seriously. And so while I was studying this, I realized I was wrong again. I'm wrong a lot. I've been wrong. So one of the ways that I was wrong was in my understanding of heaven and hell, because it talks about burning weeds and putting wheat in storehouses. So my understanding of heaven and hell was wrong. And my definition of weeds and wheat were wrong. And then my understanding of our role as his followers in all of this was wrong. Let me reread that again, and I'll give you some context to help us get a little more understanding. It won't be clear yet, but little more understanding. Is, let me read again. So he presented them with another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like a person who sowed good seed in his field. But while everyone was sleeping, an enemy came. So this may be a rabbit hole, but since I started studying this again, this term keeps coming back to me while everyone was sleeping. An enemy came. And every time I study it, it keeps standing out and it keeps coming back to mind. And this concept of not being aware or letting our guard down. But I'll continue reading for now. This enemy came and sowed darnel. So darnel's a weed among the wheat and went away. So this darnel is a weed that looks a lot like wheat. It's very hard to tell the difference between wheat and this weed that is growing. And you think that's not such a big deal, but it's actually, darnel is a poisonous plant. So this enemy came in and mixed this poison in with this life-sustaining grain that everyone's relying on. So when the plant sprouted and produced grain, the darnel also appeared. So the servants of the landowner came and said to him, "Sir, didn't you sow good seed in your field? Then where did the darnel come from?" He said, "An enemy has done this." So the servants replied, "Do you want us to gather it? Do you want us to go gather it?" And another translation would this be, should we go pull out the weeds? But he said, "No." This is a very clear answer. No. And he gives us the reason why. Since in gathering the darnel, you may uproot the wheat along with it. So to us, that may not make a lot of sense, but so we need some context to that. Roots intertwine. The roots of the weed would intertwine with the wheat. And whenever you plant the wheat, it's so closely packed together in the field. You can see this, that if you try to pull up one, it's going to pull up more with it. So if you're trying to pull up weeds, you're going to end up uprooting wheat along with it. And also, because it's so hard to tell the difference between them, you may accidentally pull up wheat instead of weeds. Because you can't tell the difference until it's fully grown into maturity. And then you can tell. But even then, it's difficult, unless you know what you're looking for. So he says, "Let both of them grow together until the harvest. And at harvest time, I will tell the reapers." The reapers are the professionals. Their specialty is harvesting. They know what they're looking for. It's easier for them to tell the difference in what is a weed and what is a wheat than the normal field workers. And he says, "First collect the darnel and tie it into bundles to be burned, and then gather the wheat into my barn." Jesus explains what all of this means in verses 36 through 43. So we're going to skip down to 36 to 43 and read that. Starting in verse 36 of Matthew 13. Then he left the crowds and went into the house, and this disciple came to him, saying, "Explain to us the parable of the darnel in the field." And he answered, "The one who sowed the good seed is the Son of Man." So Son of Man is, if we study and read more about this, we'll know that this is a name that he often calls himself. So he's the sower. So just like the early parable of the soils, he was the sower in that parable as well. And he says, "The field is the world, and the good seed are the people of the kingdom." So the world, meaning all the nations and all the people. All nations, all people. That's the field. The good seed are those who will inherit the kingdom. And then the poisonous weeds are the people of the evil one. And so darnel is a poisonous weed. Like I said, the people of the enemy of the evil one, who is Satan, who is the devil. And he says here in verse 39, "And the enemy who sows them is the devil. The harvest is the end of the age, and the reapers are the angels. As the poisonous weeds are collected and burned with fire, so it will be at the end of the age." Verse 41, the Son of Man will send his angels, and they will gather from his kingdom everything that causes sin, as well as all lawbreakers, and they will throw them in the fiery furnace, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Then the righteous will shine like the sun in the kingdom of their Father. The one who has ears had better listen. Y'all feeling about that? That's some heavy stuff. But I promise it's not as bad as it seems. So let's go back and revisit those three big things that I mentioned I was wrong about. Did anyone want to say anything? I don't want to stop anyone from saying anything. And I'm paying attention to chat, to Twitch. So, first thing I was wrong about was our understanding of heaven and hell. And the second thing I was wrong about was the definition of the weeds and the wheat. And then the third thing that I was wrong about was our role in all of this as his followers. So let's start with our understanding of heaven and hell. So it depends on how you grew up, but many people in the Protestant faith are taught grace alone is what saves us. And we just have to accept his gift and we'll be with him in heaven in the future when we die or when he returns. And our behaviors and attitudes show what we truly believe about heaven and hell. For me, I've been self-examining what my actions say and what my attitudes and thoughts say. And for me, until recently, and maybe still, if I'm honest, my attitudes towards others and myself showed a very different actual belief than that, which is what we do determines where we go. Because a lot of people believe this way, and a lot of people believe that this is what Christianity is all about, is if we do more good than bad, then we'll go to heaven, and if we do more bad than good, we'll go to hell, except some really, really bad things, then you go straight to hell for those things with no hope of escape. And some really, really bad people like Hitler and serial killers, they're going to go straight to hell with no... Judas the Betrayer, he's going to go straight to hell with no hope of redemption, no hope of salvation. This belief then determines how we treat other people, and then it also determines how we view God, if we weigh people based on the good and the bad that they've done. Because then we ask ourselves, how could a good God, a loving God, send people to hell? Except for the really bad ones, we don't mind if they go there, but for the rest of us, the normal people like you and me overall, we're mostly good, so how could he send us there? That seems like a really mean and hateful thing. But to understand all of this, we have to look back at Genesis 1 so that we can see the original design of things. And in the very first verse, very first chapter, creation began with heaven and earth, not heaven and hell. So in the beginning, humans walked together with God and they rule alongside him and they shared everything together. So imagine a perfect, loving relationship, trusting relationship. That is what was happening. But then one decision that was made all of that fall apart. Because humans decided to take on God's role of wanting to define what was good and evil for themselves, instead of trusting his good judgment. And then as a result of that was this separation of heaven and earth as humans push away God. And I've shared a resource in the Discord if y'all want to check that out. And I'll share some more resources after this as well. But hell has no place in God's good world. It was never his design. It was never part of his original plan. It came up later as a tragic result of our selfish decisions. And by that, humans unleashed hell by pushing away God and trying to take his place. And now there's a lot of evil and destruction in the world, and Jesus describes hell as a ruinous consequence of human sin and evil. And we can all admit, regardless of our beliefs, whether we believe in God or not, that there are some really, really bad things in the world. And we all want, if there is a God, why doesn't he step in and handle those things? We get angry and we yell at him when he doesn't. So why wait until the harvest? Why not instant judgment, instant justice for that? So N.T. Wright, Matthew for Everyone, I often refer to this, and he's a very good source. He has commentary on the entire Bible. But in Matthew for Everyone, he says, these parables are not a direct answer to the question, and probably no direct answer can be given in this life, but they show, through the various different stories, that God's sovereign rule over the world isn't quite such a straightforward thing as people sometimes imagine. Would people really like it if God were to rule the world directly and immediately, so that our every thought and action were weighed and instantly judged, and if necessary punished in the scales of his absolute holiness? If the price of God stepping in and stopping a campaign of genocide were that he would also have to rebuke and restrain every other evil impulse, including those that we all still know and cherish within ourselves, would we be prepared to pay that price? If we ask God to act on special occasions, do we really suppose that he could do that simply when we want him to, and then back off again for the rest of the time? So it's not so simple, not so straightforward. When we want him to punish others but not us. The hell is a consequence of our own decisions, either by the destruction that we bring here on earth, or by our decision not to want anything to do with him, pushing him away. So imagine if you hated someone, and a lot of people hate Jesus. Would you want to spend eternity with that person? If you hated that person, you wouldn't want anything to do with them. And he's not a hateful God. He lets us choose. And that choice, separation. Hell is separation from him. But that's not where the story ends. Jesus sees a darker reality of evil than we do. And in his love and his goodness and his mercy, he can't let evil go unchecked. And that's why he came to earth to deal with it. And we're studying him here on earth dealing with it. He sees the real enemy. And the real enemy is this inhuman evil that's luring humanity away from his safety and his shalom with this promise of power. We are not his enemy. We are not God's enemy. He loves us. And having seen us lured away from his safety, and having seen us being hurled down this path of self-destruction, in the turmoil of seeing us dying, these people that he loves literally to death, he, having the choice and the power, took our pain and suffering on himself and died in our place so that we could live, that we would not have to suffer those consequences. And that's the true good news, even though we often forget it because we keep replacing mercy and grace with deeds. So our understanding of this determines our understanding of weeds versus wheat. So let's look at our definition of weeds and wheat. Again, like I said before, I would read this parable and I would think that I'm definitely wheat because I said those magic words and I got my golden ticket to heaven. And the people that don't have the golden ticket are the weeds. Or those people who insert your preferred sin or insert your preferred people group here, those are the weeds. But again, like I said before, I was wrong. And the more I dig in and study, the more I see how wrong I was. I don't have all the answers. I never will. But what I do know is that we're going to be very, very surprised by who is and who is not in heaven. And Jesus explains here in this parable what it means to be wheat. He says the good seed, the wheat, those are the people who will inherit the kingdom. And then if we want to look into who will inherit the kingdom, we can look back at all of his teachings. If we look through the 4 Gospels, we'll see all of his teachings, the Sermon on the Mount, his life and his actions. Those are the things, those teachings teach us what it takes to inherit the kingdom. And then he explains the weeds, this poisonous weed. These are the people of the enemy, these poisonous people of the enemy, the evil one, this inhuman evil that lures us away. So then we have to think about, what does it mean to be poisonous? Looking at the context of his day, who was he constantly butting his heads with, y'all? Y'all remember? Who's he constantly fighting with? Fighting with religious leaders. The Pharisees. Yeah, exactly. Yes, exactly, Victoria. Welcome. In Matthew 23:15, he says, this is Jesus talking to the Pharisees. He says, "Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You traverse land and sea to win a single convert. And when he becomes one, you make him twice as much a son of hell as you are." He repeatedly calls them poisonous vipers and hypocrites. Why do you think he called them these things? Can y'all think of an example? Like, the overall trend was that they were constantly minimizing their own sins. They had plenty of their own. And they were maximizing everyone else's sins. They had decided to become the judges, the ones who determined who was wheat and who was wheat. And they had become religious police enforcing compliance. And anyone not complying with what they believed were the rules were considered filthy, like dung. They wiped their lives of them, they wiped them off, dusted their hands of them, and decided those people aren't going to make it into heaven. They were deciding for themselves who would and wouldn't make it into heaven. And then they would teach other people to do the same thing. And then James 3:6-8 also says another way that we can be poisonous. Starting in verse 6, "The tongue is also a fire, a world of wickedness among the parts of the body. It pollutes the whole person, sets the course of his life on fire, and is itself set on fire by hell. For every species of beasts and birds, of reptiles and creatures of the sea is tamed and has been tamed by the human race. But no one can tame the tongue. It is a restless evil, full of deadly poison." Our actions and our words can also be poison. So the weeds are also, besides just these poisonous behaviors that we have, they're those who know he's Messiah, yet willfully reject him. They prefer to be the gods of their own lives, and they hate him, and they hate his teachings, and they want nothing to do with him. This is what it means to be weeds. So it's not just people who mess up on occasion, or mess up and we all mess up, every single one of us. It's not that. Weeds are poisonous behaviors and decisions to not want anything to do with them. Now let's take some time to see how this is relevant for us today. So for me, I'll start with me. Because I used to look down on the Pharisees. I thought they were horrible people. I still do, if I'm honest. I'm still judging them. But then I would turn around and do the exact same thing that they were doing. And I never made the connection that I was doing the same thing. I was also a Pharisee. Because my view of myself in the mirror was too obscured to see clearly, see reality. Because I was judging the judgers, and I still do this now. Even like while I was preparing for this study today. Oh, these people really need to hear this. Thinking of this people group. Oh, they really need to hear it. And I had to actually delete something from my notes because I was about to go off on something. Like, oh, yeah, that was me doing the exact same thing that he's saying don't do. Because it, like it says in James, the same mouth that builds some people up can turn around and tear others down with the same breath. So the root of all of the issues in the state of our world is because we have decided to take on God's role for ourselves, defining good and evil for ourselves instead of trusting his good judgment. We can reject his teachings and authority by trying to take over his role as judge, and we do this all the time. And we decide for ourselves who's in and who's out. We're constantly maximizing other people's sins, minimizing our own, and yelling out hate and calling people names and cherry picking verses to condemn other people and then ignoring the verses that talk about what we're doing. We're all guilty of something on that list. There's a lot of lists. And we can't see clearly. But while we were sleeping, an enemy came in and poisoned us with lies and has turned us into people who poison others. And we write people off as lost, but in reality, we don't know their future. We can't tell the state of their hearts, and we can't see their internal growth. And we often get stuck on what someone's done in the past, and that past clouds our view of how or if they've actually grown since or will grow in the future. Our behaviors push people away. And then we can play the blame game all day long and say, well, they left because they didn't have enough faith. They shouldn't have let this one thing mess up their faith. That's the blame game. And if you really think about it, it's kind of hard. And think about it in your own life. It's hard to build a relationship in the first place if you don't feel safe with that person. And it's hard to want to get to know someone when the representatives of that person portray that person as a hateful, abusive, and judgmental person. Would you want to spend an eternity with someone who only ever tells you all the things you're doing wrong? I wouldn't. So how can you blame them for going away? We ignore our faults in that by saying, oh, we're just sharing the truth in love. But what we're really doing is spewing hate and judgment and vengeance. Self-righteousness. We're more guilty because we push them away. We've made a hateful, abusive, vindictive God in our own image, and we're worshiping that God. And we're rejecting the true Messiah and calling him the fake. And when we do this, we make hell on earth and we drag others there with us. And God knows this about us. He knows we're terrible judges. So he says in the parable, don't try to pull out the weeds. You'll end up hurting the weed in the process, so don't do it. So then that gets into the third way I was wrong, which is our job in this, our role in all of this as his followers. Our job is not to be the Jesus police. He specifically said not to do that. And as soon as we start saying who is and who isn't getting into heaven, we're trying to take his place, and we've missed the entire point. We answer to him for our own actions, not everyone else's. We are responsible when we hurt and push people away from him. And we are responsible for what we teach others to do. In Matthew 23:15, it says, woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You traverse land and sea to win a single convert, and when he becomes one, you make him twice as much a son of hell as you are. And in Matthew 5:19, that's the Sermon on the Mount, he says, therefore, whoever nullifies one of the least of these commands and teaches others to do the same shall be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever keeps and teaches them, he shall be called great in the kingdom of heaven. And something that I just noticed when I was reading this verse now, they'll be the least in the kingdom of heaven. It's not saying they'll be kicked out because they did this thing, so that's good news, because we've all done this. We've all ignored some of these commandments. Good news is they're still in there. They didn't get kicked out. That's good news. There's hope. But we are commanded not to carry his name in vain. And we are commanded not to cherry pick so that we can minimize our own sins and maximize everyone else's. But that doesn't mean that we don't hold each other accountable. And it doesn't mean that we don't protect each other from evil things, because we still need to protect each other. And we still need to hold each other accountable. But how we do that matters. Before we can do that well, we have to remember what the good news of the kingdom really is. And it's not about what we do or don't do. It's about what Jesus does and has done. And it's about what he came to do here and what he is still doing here. And as soon as we make it about what we do, it's no longer the good news of the kingdom. So if we call ourselves as followers, if we're the wheat, what does wheat do? Y'all know what wheat does? Grows. It nourishes. Brings life. Sustains. Feeds. Yes, exactly, Willard. Thank you. It does not reap. If we call ourselves workers in the field, what did he tell the workers to do? Told them to grow the wheat. Let him and the reapers deal with the weeds. Who reaps and separates? Angels. We're not his angels. We are either poisonous weeds, or we grow as wheat and nourish and feed, sustain, or we grow the wheat as workers, not deciding who we do or don't nurture. We are indiscriminately tending the fields. We leave the sorting to God and his angels. He's a good and trustworthy judge. We are not. What could you do about this? Do you have any thoughts about how can we apply what we've learned here to our own lives? One thing you can do, you don't have to have all the answers right now. Look inside your own heart, and I'll do this too. And ask God to show you what in your life might be poisonous. And if you see any areas that are poisonous, ask him to help you root those things out. It is a dangerous prayer, but it is worth it. It makes you a safer person. It's very important, again, to remember that Jesus does not see humans as the enemy. He loves us. So we're not warring against humans or people groups. The enemy is not other people. So if you've experienced or witnessed hurt by those who claim to follow him, and if that influenced your view of God and Jesus, or if you were hurt by lies that may have been taught by those who claim to follow him, we were commanded, those who do that are doing that against his will. We were commanded not to carry his name in vain. Exodus 20 verse 7. That's the third commandment in the 10 Commandments. It says, don't take my name in vain. But the root word of take means carry. So it's not about swear words. It's about ambassadorship, representation. We take on his name and we become his representatives. And when we do hurtful things to others in his name, it hurts him. And that's carrying his name in vain. And it's hurting other people, people who he loves. And that is carrying his name in vain. And that's trying to take on his role as judge, and we're commanded not to do that. So please don't blame him for human error. Give him a chance, because he actually is really a good and loving God. He loves you. He is good. So how can we live all this out together? We can hold each other accountable if we are his followers. We can hold each other accountable. We're holding each other as his followers accountable. We're not going out and trying to force people who don't believe in him to follow his rules. We're holding each other accountable. Imagine in the past, imagine in history a time when Christians have gone out and tried to be the judges and force everyone else to comply. The Inquisitions, conquests, Salem witch trials, fill in the blank. That's what happens when we try to take his role. We bring hell on earth. So we hold each other as his followers accountable. But that needs to be done in a trusting relationship. It's not just swooping in and pooping on people and leaving. It's a trusting relationship, which means spending time together, building community together, sharing experiences and learnings with each other. And all that has to be done in the heart of the greatest command, which is to love the Lord your God with everything you have and love others as yourself. Love is the target. And then some people say, well, I'm sharing the truth in love, but what is the attitude in your heart when you're doing that? When you're getting distracted by what we do or we don't do, we're missing the entire point and we've forgotten what the good news is. Again, it's not about what we do or don't do. It's about what Jesus does and has done. And as soon as we make it about what we do, it's no longer the good news of the kingdom. And imagine what the world would look like if we stuck to our jobs and stopped trying to take on God's role. Verse 43, it says, then the righteous will shine like the sun. And again, that's referencing the book of Daniel. Daniel 12:3 says, but the wise will shine like the brightness of the heavenly expanse. And those bringing many to righteousness will be like the stars forever and ever. So instead of pushing people away, more people are coming to know the loving and beautiful Jesus who really is. That's what it would look like. That's all I have to say. Did anyone have anything they wanted to share? Are there any aha moments for anyone? And again, you don't have to have all the answers today. It is the idea that we continue to grow and study and learn our entire lives. So you don't have to have all the answers immediately. We won't. It's a process and it's a lifetime. Lifetime of learning and growing. I'm going to go ahead and close this in prayer. Thank you, Father, again, for your love for us And this good news that it's not about heaven or hell. It's about you getting the hell out of us. It's about you uprooting the evil and the poison inside of us, getting it out of us and taking it on yourself so that we can live and we can be wheat. That's great news. Thank you for that. Thank you for your love that you would do that for us. Please help us to remember the things that you've said today through me. Help us remember what you said. Help us to think on it. And remember, continue to grow. Continue to nourish other people and sustain and give life to other people instead of poison. Help us to remember these things as we go throughout our weeks and our months. Years. Ask all of these things in Jesus' name. Amen.